Gibbons, wrote in the 1700s. He was an English historian, and he wrote a book called The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. So, whereas today as historians, whereas today we don't necessarily take a lot of what Gibbons has to say as fact. Now, 40 years ago, and this book had a lot of staying power. It's pretty good if you write a book and it's sort of the gospel for 200 years. But Gibbons made a lot of theses about why Rome fell. And it's interesting, there's a lot, when you're a historian like myself, and I go to a wedding, people often just come up and say, yeah, hey, why did Rome fall? As I'm sitting there eating the shrimp cocktail. Or why was the American Civil War fought? Simple questions I can answer in a sentence or two. Gibbons, when he wrote about that, he looked at the internal decline of Rome as the reason Rome fell. And I can see eventually you're going to have a question, compare and contrast the Roman Republic to the United States. And a lot of people did do that and still do that. In fact, I can remember even being in Clay Elementary in the 1970s where the teacher had a chart and we compared those things. It's a good thing to do in history. So Gibbons, back to history though, used a lot of primary sources. In other words, even though we don't necessarily agree with what his interpretation of the sources, he kind of goes down as an example of the importance of sources. So now once you get to high school at Ephrata, you'll learn how to, I believe, more of a modern research paper where you use sources. And remember, in history, there's two types of sources, believe it or not. There's primary sources and also secondary sources.
Yep.
Oh, you're doing that now? Oh, good. Okay, good, right, yeah, so it's amazing. There's thousands of each, but there's really only two types. In that regard. Now, evidence goes back to our archaeology. But just finishing up with the historiography, so there was just a recent book by a professor named Peter Heather. So Peter Heather wrote a book just recently, and he really says that, in effect, the Roman Empire really didn't fall. It's difficult. People like the dates. We know the American Declaration of Independence was 1776. Civil War is 1861. I'm sure we'll talk about in the class, historians don't really know when the Roman Empire fell, and in effect, if it really fell. I usually make the case the Roman Empire still exists. It's the Roman Catholic Church, the most enduring institution in the world. It comes out of Rome, and that's the Roman Catholic Church. Some dates you'll hear the fall of Rome is 410, some dates you'll hear is 476, and usually it's when these terrible barbarians, pillaged and ran Rome down. But we have to look closer and realize the emperors of Rome in those periods weren't even Roman themselves. In some cases, they were German. Remember, barbarian it's only somebody else who's a barbarian, right? Somebody come from outside are barbarians. I mean, barbarian comes from Greek where they couldn't understand what anybody else was saying and they just heard gibberish, which was bar, 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 and that really means barbarians. So Rome's always trying to keep out these barbarians, and that's one of the themes of what we're going to end with, Hadrian's Wall. But at the same time, as you could argue, this article sort of makes the case, in effect, that Rome really didn't fall. The barbarians became Rome. And I think that's sort of a fact. Okay, Ms. Erickson, do you mind run so what we're going to watch now is a short clip on Hadrian's Wall. Now, the pyramids get a lot of press in ancient history. I'm going to make the case that maybe Hadrian's Wall in England, the most fantastic Roman ruin in England. It should be up there with the pyramids.
For a project that was built by hand, the dimensions of Hadrian's Wall are staggering. It was made up of 25 million individual stones. Laid together, they stretched across northern England, cutting Britain in two. Built in the 120s AD, it marked the northern limit of the Roman Empire. South of the wall, Roman control stretched nearly unchallenged to the sands of Arabia. The wall was a dividing line in the bloody conflict between the Roman army, which had conquered most of Britain, and the local tribes who were trying to drive them out. Hadrian's Wall, named after the Roman emperor who ordered it, was the ultimate statement of Roman determination. 2,000 years of time and weather have worn it down, but when it was built, it was a wonder of the world. When new, Hadrian's Wall stood about 20 feet high and 10 feet thick. More than just a wall, it was a complex of forts, castles, and lookout towers. Along much of the wall today, only remnants of its glory remain. But a reconstructed part of the wall gives us some idea of how awe-inspiring it must have been to local British tribesmen when it was built across their lands. To the locals who built their own houses from timber, mud, and thatch, Hadrian's Wall must have seemed like something from an alien planet. Here was a stone structure, seemingly endless, built with a technology they'd never seen before. The Britons watched as the Romans used novelties like brick and mortar, archgates and tiles to reshape the world before their very eyes. What propelled the Romans to undertake their biggest feat of engineering? History gives us clues, but no easy answers. The only surviving reference by Roman writers is all too brief. It simply states that the wall was built to separate the untamed northern areas of Britain from the Roman-held areas in the south. The Romans had begun colonizing Britain about 80 years earlier in 43 AD, under the Emperor Claudius. Southern parts of Britain, today's England, had fairly quickly come under Roman control, sometimes willingly. The British upper class enjoyed the privileges of a new Roman lifestyle, whose remains still exist in English towns like Bath.
Oh, Kat, let's stop you. Have you been there?
I was in Bath, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, my mom and dad went there on a travel sabbatical. And
Just that whole city, the town was, the main town, and,
yeah, no, that's cool.
They said not to touch the water, but I did.
You had to. You were there. Yeah. So, all right. So keep in mind, once again, when we're studying the Roman Empire in our class the next month, we're talking a big area. So most of what is today England was under Roman domination. So remember today, how many people watched the royal wedding over the weekend? Okay, so once again, remember that there's not really a country called England, right? We know it as Great Britain, sometimes called the United Kingdom, which makes up really 4 kingdoms, and that's England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. That's really what makes up Great Britain. So the England part of today's Great Britain, that's largely under Roman control. The other areas really were not. After the Romans leave, these bad barbarians come in and take over. And 3 Germanic tribes actually conquer Roman Britain. And we know them as the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. And they're Germanic. So, of course, that's where the name England comes from, is Angleland. In other words, largely England is Germanic. In fact, English is a Germanic language. The people, though, of Scotland and Wales and Ireland are actually not Germanic. They're more what we call Celtic. They're actually a different ethnicity than the British, who are largely Germanic. Okay, so how late do we have here? How much?
About 10 minutes.
10, okay, good. Okay, so we're going to run through use our rubric here of, we did immediatist, medieval, and modern for the historiography and archaeology, so we'll also do that with Hadrian's Wall. So the immediatist, of course, is Hadrian. Hadrian showed up, I think, 122 CE, and you want Hadrian up there. So Hadrian ruled from 117 to 138 CE. And CE, of course, means Common Era. Other textbooks call it after AD, so it's sort of an interchangeable term. I'm not sure which your textbooks use. Do you use CE?
We use both. Some of our resources do.
Use both. Okay. Okay. So showed up, and once again, this is the traditional interpretation. Hadrian had this wall built, was to keep out these barbarians. In other words, if you saw the map up on the screen, remember it runs 75 miles across England, east to west. 80 Roman miles. You'll learn Roman miles are a little bit different than our miles, but not too much. So the traditional interpretation of what Hadrian wanted is this is a wall that nobody's going to cross. It's like the Berlin Wall in Germany in the 1950s and 60s. You cross this line, it's a totally alien area. We're going to have troops. Remember, each mile there was a fort built, which was, and I think we just saw a little bit of that in the video. and that was always interpretation. Well, during medieval times, that interpretation of why the wall was built might not be so great, because what if I'm living in Scotland and I'm writing my Hadrian's Wall? Aren't they saying something bad about me as a Scotsman? I'm the barbarian? No, the wall kind of fell into disrepute. In fact, I was just reading a book last night, getting ready for the talk, and it was a story of 3 people that journeyed and toured Hadrian's Wall. And once again, just like we can go to Gettysburg and I can and spend weeks there, Hadrian's Wall, you can walk the entire length. I mean, we have the nice linear trail in Ephrata that goes 8 miles. Imagine Hadrian's Wall that goes 75 miles. So it was a mom and dad and their kids, and they walked the entire length of Hadrian's Wall, and they stayed in bed and breakfasts along the way. And then they listened to all especially the older farmers that lived there. And once again, that's history, oral history. When you talk to somebody that lived that in the past, including your grandparents, which you should do, and write that down for oral history. When they found, going back and talking what their great grandfather thought, the wall was something that nobody really wanted. Farmers didn't want the wall went through their property. They didn't want people coming here messing up my cornfield. I mean, farmers are like that today, right? They didn't want people traipsing around. Well, as farming started to decline in Great Britain in the 1980s and 90s due to a disease known as hoof and mouth disease, I think it is, like the cattle die. As farming declined, suddenly people said, hey, we have a resource here. Hey, we can now, and now the biggest industry in this region of Great Britain is actually tourism. Just like in Lancaster County, our #1 job creator is agriculture. Our #2 is tourism. And then once again, in Pennsylvania's #2 industry is tourism. So it's interesting how suddenly the wall, which was considered a liability in medieval at times, now is pretty modern. And then back to archaeology. In 1991, there was just recently an excavation of one of these forts. They're called mile fortlets, and that's a fort every mile. And in there, they found the barracks, once again, of average soldiers. And I just some notes is found. Usually when we think of archaeological things, we're thinking gold or silver or weapons. But here they found game boards. That's pretty cool. I mean, once again, when you're not on duty, what are you doing? You're playing games and all kinds of average, everyday things. And that's really what sort of our goal of archaeology is. Okay, so next I want to just talk a little bit about what else I have in the packet here. And this is more just for you and maybe, or your parents when you go home. This is just a list of different majors that a college of Penn State's size has if you're interested in any of these careers. We mentioned anthropology as a major, and I have a description there. We mentioned archaeology as a major. We have a major that's